Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're going to get in today to doing some training on the basics of how to sell deregulated energy. I'm going to give you guys some good information here that's going to help you to sell this stuff like a professional. We're going to talk about not just the industry itself and the basics of how it all works, the power grid, energy pricing, but get into just kind of scratching the surface on what kinds of things you want to be looking at, paying attention to in order to get out there and really drive sales, like a professional instead of the way most of these people do it. Most of these call centers in the business cannot sell this stuff unless they come in and the person they're talking to has a higher rate than they do. And that's absurd. And that's why most of these call centers struggle. So we're going to talk about how to really, what to look for, what to know, what to understand, so that you can really get in here and do this thing well at a high level. Let's get started. You have three components to energy, or the power grid as we know it. You've got generation. Generation refers to the conversion of raw materials into energy. We burn the raw materials, it heats water. The boiling water creates steam, which powers a turbine, which creates the electricity. Okay. We have transmission. Transmission refers to taking the high voltage electricity and piping it through the power lines over very long distances to get to its destination. They use AC power. So it's extremely high voltage AC power. And the reason they do that is because AC power, the alternating current, literally travels in a circular motion. It goes in that circular motion. The gravity, when it comes up to the top of the circle and then comes down, that gravity is what's literally pushing it through the power lines. That's how it works. And then the last part is the distribution. Distribution refers to the stepping down of that high voltage power at substations so that it can be piped into homes and businesses safely. It's still high voltage. It'll still burn you and kill you, but it's not near as dangerous as the high voltage stuff going through the lines. So generation, transmission, distribution. And from that, we get three different types of energy. Okay, we've got fossil fuels. That's the most common, what we all know about: natural gas, coal, and oil, made from dinosaur bones. We have nuclear. It comes from uranium. Same process, split the atoms, creates heat, boils the water, that has steam, powers the turbine, same way. And then green energy obviously works a little bit different, but you've got three types of green energy: pure green energy, the renewable sources, solar, wind, and hydroelectric. So fossil fuels, nuclear, and green energy. So price fluctuations in energy. There's a lot of different reasons why the price of electricity and natural gas fluctuate. It's a commodity, and a commodity is a raw material or primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold, such as copper, oil, or coffee. All commodities are traded on an open market, all right? And so electricity, energy's got its own stock market. They've got a real-time market and they have a day-ahead market. So it's traded on that open market, and price fluctuates in regards to a lot of factors, mostly tied to supply and demand, okay? And supply and demand can be affected by a lot of different conditions. It can be affected by the weather. For example, when it gets really cold, it damages power lines, it blows up transformers, and causes a lot of damage to the substation level. So the ability to transfer that electricity to the location where it's going to be used is impaired. You have political reasons. You have political factors such as war, trade embargoes, things like that. And then, of course, technology. Anytime you make up an advancement in technology, it generally drives the price down. When we developed ways to do fracking and horizontal drilling here in America, it really drove the price down heavily on natural gas. That's an example of that. And then speculation. Speculation, you've got, when you talk about a stock market or an open trading market, a commodities market, there's two types of plays there. You've got investments and you've got speculation. Investments, an example of an investment would be a person or a company buying oil stock to balance out their portfolio. Whereas speculation would be somebody or an entity trying to guess what the market's going to do, and they're going to make a play based on what they think is going to happen. So if they think that prices are about to dip and they sell while they have it because they can sell it at a higher price, or they're going to wait and they're going to buy it low and sell it when it goes back up, that's speculation. So not so much tied to real events, just what they think is going to happen, but those speculators have a big effect on the markets. And then the pricing model itself that is used not just in the United States, but most of the world, it's called locational marginal pricing. And without getting into the details here, because it does get pretty sophisticated, when electricity is delivered somewhere, if there's a demand for electricity, okay, that's called a load. A load is a big piece of a chunk of electricity that's going somewhere. So your house is a load, a train station is a load, a big skyscraper building is a load. So any entity or anything that's using a lot of electricity is called a load. They have to balance the power grid when basically in real time. You have to balance demand with generation because you can't store power. In other words, if you bring on a bunch of electricity and you deliver it somewhere, you've got to be able to use it right there because you can't just store it. We can store it in those batteries, but once you put the electricity onto the grid and start transmitting it, there's no way to store it. It's use it or lose it. And so the locational marginal pricing works that when these people, the operators of the system, when they have generation coming in to meet a load, if they're off and there's extra, these guys get fined. It's like they have to pay the difference to the other side. So they lose money on that. So the nature of that pricing model itself creates changes and fluctuations in the energy. And they do that to keep us to balance the power grid, because if we don't match the generation with the demand correctly, then it strains the grid, and that's how you have brownouts and blackouts. So it's a big deal. So those are the different factors that are going to affect the price of energy. Here's a good graph that shows the price of oil over about a 40-year stretch. You can see that it's clearly tied to certain world events. That's a prime example of how political factors can affect something of this nature. So all these different things are constantly affecting the price of electricity and natural gas, driving it up or down. Okay, so entities of the power grid. You've got ISOs, or independent system operators, and you have RTOs, or regional transmission organizations. These are entities that are involved basically in the transmission process, managing those power lines that go state to state and transmitting that power over long distances. That's pretty much what they're for. And you'll see this graphic coming up, and it kind of shows a map of the ISOs and the RTOs in the United States. You see the like ISO up here in New York. This is also Canada, by the way. Like I said, most of the world operates on the same model. Southwestern Power Pool, that's a big RTO. Electric Reliability Council of Texas is like its own entity. It's technically not an ISO or an RTO. You don't have to know all this stuff, really. Just kind of be familiar with this map. Somebody says PJM interconnection, you want to know what it is they mean, but it's not going to have a lot of relevance in terms of closing deals on the phone. So other entities we're looking at, we've got the utility companies. Now the utility companies is where we're coming in at the state level. So every state is going to have multiple utility companies in their territory, all right? And you've also got electric cooperatives, or what we call a co-op. It's still a utility company in a way, but it's owned by a certain different set of stakeholders. I don't really know all the technical differences between a co-op and a local utility. You don't need to. The only thing you need to know is that if you're making a sales call and somebody tells you they have a co-op, that means they are not deregulated. So you can't sell them. And these co-ops come up in little pockets here and there, sometimes right inside a regulated or a deregulated market. So if we take a look at this image right here, this is a graphic of Massachusetts. The national grid territory is in purple. And then, for example, right now we have a campaign going for national grid in Massachusetts. So if you look at this map and you see these green parts, that's the municipal. These are co-ops. So these are pockets of areas where there is a co-op right in the middle of a deregulated market. So all the purple around here, these are areas that we can service, people that we can sell to, but in the green, those are areas that we cannot, okay? So that's all you need to know about a co-op. But what's relevant here, whenever you're on a sales pass for energy, you definitely need to know who the local utility companies are that you're servicing. You might have one, you might have many. It just depends on the particular product. But you need to know those local utility companies, be aware of their name, who they are, what their bills look like, etc. We're going to get into that a little bit later and why that information is relevant and important to you on a sales pass. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the retail market. Most of what we've talked about so far has really been a product of the wholesale market. All right. So in other words, the generation companies getting it out to the different what we call retail electricity providers. Now we're going to talk about getting it from those companies down to the consumer level, what we call the retail market. So you have regulated markets and you have deregulated markets. Okay, the difference is this: in a regulated market, there's no competition for the local utility. Okay, they own the poles, the wires, and the substations, and they sell the juice or the electricity to the end customer. All right. In a deregulated market, it's open to competition. So, in other words, the local utility company, they still own the poles, the wires, and the substations, but they sell the wholesale power generation companies sell their power to what's called an ESCO or an RAP, an energy service company or a retail electricity provider. And those companies there, they sell the juice to the end consumer. Now, in a deregulated market, the local utility company still can and still does sell juice to the end consumer, but they generally are not as heavily involved in that retail competition. Some are more aggressive than others in the retail market. That's their choice based on what upper management wants to do, but those are the differences. If I'm in a regulated market, I've got no options. If I'm in a deregulated market, I do have options. I can stay with my local utility or I can buy from a competitive supplier, which is an ESCO or an REP. So when we make phone calls to customers, we are calling on behalf of an ESCO or an REP to sell them their energy. Okay, that's how that works. And here's a map of the model. So IPP, these guys up here, that's an independent power producer. In other words, a wholesale generation company. Okay, they're making the power. And then remember we talked about transmission, the high voltage electricity going over long distances. And that's going to go out to your retailers, your utility companies, and your REPs. And then those people are going to send it through the distribution wires out there to the individual customers and bill the customers. That's how your retail competition market works. Okay, so now let's talk about different types of energy rates. First of all, you've got fixed rates. So a fixed rate is just as the name indicates, it's a set price. In other words, okay, Mr. Jones, we're giving you 7.2 cents per kilowatt hour for the next 12 months. We're locking those rates in. So you lock them in at 7.2 cents per kilowatt hour. And no matter what happens with the market, whether the price fluctuates up or the price fluctuates down, either way, they are going to be locked in at that same low rate. There's certainly benefits to a fixed rate, but it's like anything else. There's pros and there's cons. And there's times of year where it's definitely the best thing to be on a fixed rate. There's times of year when it's maybe not so much the best thing to be on a fixed rate. Okay? Then you have variable rates. Just as the name indicates, a variable rate product is going to fluctuate based on the price of the electricity. And you can see this graph right here. This is a really good graph. Looking from about 2007 to 2017, we can see how the average price of electricity has fluctuated. The difference in these two products, aside from the nature of the pricing, is the fees and the agreement. A fixed rate product generally is it has a contract. It's going to be for a 6 month or a 12 month, or it can be a 24-month contract. So if they break that, there's going to be a termination fee. There's almost always an early termination fee with fixed rate products. There's a lot of times monthly fees. Sometimes there's even enrollment fees to get on those plans. Whereas a variable rate product, does not have that. There's no monthly fees. Usually there's not a termination fee or a cancellation fee. You generally have no kind of a contract there. So you can get on a variable rate product anytime you want, and you can get off anytime you want. Now we start to get in at this point to some of the angles to take when selling this stuff, or angles that other people take. For example, there's a lot of people in the business that knock the variable rate products, and they act like it's the end of the world if you're on a variable rate product. And that's very short sighted, and it's really misguiding the consumer. They do that because it's a money play. They want to lock people into those long term contracts so that they know they have their customer tied down. They're going to make that money. But it's not always the best thing. There's certain times a year, for example, in the summertime, we know every year in the spring and summer, the price of electricity is going to go up because the heat rate index is the single most important factor that affects the price of electricity. Well, on the flip side of that, the price goes down every year in the fall and the winter. So it's in variable rate products were designed so that people who understand the market and are educated about the market have flexibility in their product and can have a product that will allow them to take advantage of falling rates at times when the market is doing that, and be able to switch and go back over to a fixed rate plan whenever they see that the price is going to go back up. So variable rate products, when the consumer is educated properly and they're getting the right guidance from their broker, you can really do very, very well on variable rate products. Most of the energy broker community out there talks about it like if somebody's on a variable rate product, it's the end of the world. But keep in mind that utilities operate on a variable rate product. So if you do not select a competitive supplier, you stay with your local utility, what you have is a variable rate product. It's not the end of the world. It's a big, like I said, it's a big money play that's out there in the industry, and it's a lot of times doesn't do the right thing for the consumer. All right, so you have standard rates. Standard rates are just basic energy. In other words, if you have a standard rate product, you're getting mostly fossil fuels. That's what the majority of our energy that's used in the power grid comes from, is from fossil fuels. Okay. The flip side of that is you have green rates. Green rates means that you've got some renewable product in there. All right. Now, by the way, green rates, you're always going to pay a little bit more for green rates, but customers do that. All right. I've worked on sales passes where they had green rates that were quite a bit higher, but the supplier would pay an additional commission for selling the green. And on those passes, we sold almost exclusively green energy. Green energy, it's a hot button for people. People want to take care of the planet. They want to protect the ozone layer and, global warming and all that stuff that they hear about out there. So it's a big, big selling point for a lot of people. They're very passionate about it. So they're willing to pay extra for a green rate product. It's important to know when you are talking about a green rate product that if somebody selects a green rate product, it's not going to be 100% of their energy is coming from a green or renewable source. It's usually right around 30%. Okay. In fact, I've not seen anything that's more than 30%. We have a variable rate campaign going right now where there's a green rate product, and it's exactly that, 30% renewable sources. But again, that's a big hot button for people. And even if rates are higher, they're willing to go ahead and pay that a lot of time. But you've got to sell them the benefits of it. If you sell it to them, they'll buy it. If you don't sell it to them, obviously they're not. Now, here's something else to keep in mind about green rates. There's two types of what they classify as green energy, okay? And the first type is the true renewable product that we discussed, hydroelectric, wind, or solar, all right? But there's another category of green products, and that is basically just regular energy, so a standard type product, fossil fuels, but they put some additives in it, and these additives make it burn cleaner. So when it burns cleaner, it's not releasing the same level of volatile organic compounds into the atmosphere. If you're talking about green rates and green product, you want to know your competition, know your company that you're selling for, and know your competitors, because some of these people are out there touting a green rate product because it has those additives and it offsets the carbon footprint. But that's not really a true green energy. So it's just an angle that you want to be aware of because it might help you at one point. If you're out there, we have a 30% renewable product on this UER campaign we are. Well, if I'm calling in a certain territory and somebody tells me they've got a green rate product with RP&G, I know because I've done my homework on Renaissance Power and Gas that a lot of their green energy is that second type that's just got the additive in there that offsets that carbon footprint. It's not the same kind of true green product. And if I'm real close on the rates and I know about that and I can illustrate that to the consumer, there's a chance for me to go ahead and close that sale. And I might have a little bit higher rate than they do. But because I have a true green product instead of just the product that has the additive in it, that would be just enough possibly to tip them over to my side and go ahead and buy from me, even if I was just a little bit higher. All right. So this is important stuff that we're getting into here. All right. So selling in the retail market. Almost all local utility companies offer variable rates only. Now, I want to be clear on this. When we look at variable rates, for the purpose of this conversation, most people in the energy industry, if it's not a 12-month locked-in deal, they're going to call it a variable rate, all right? Because it does fluctuate. But if you look at this price here, okay, this is PPL in Pennsylvania, all right? Well, it's not really a variable rate. I mean, it's what it is it's a fixed rate that they lock in for a 6-month period. They lock it in for a 6-month period. Here it is, June to November. Here's November to May. December to May. So it's a fixed rate, but it's 6 months at a time, and then they change it. Well, in the industry, they consider that a variable product because it does not lock in for a full 12 months. So just be aware of that. But yes, it is a variable. Now, some of these companies have a true variable product in that the price will fluctuate on a monthly basis. And then the other important term to know here is the price to compare. And that's what this is right here, this PTC. The price to compare is on everybody's bill. And that is simply what price the local utility in their area is offering the energy for. So if I'm in the territory for ComEd in Illinois, and ComEd Illinois right now has a 7.4 per kilowatt hours product, that is the price to compare. And they base that on the fact that, look, in a competitive retail environment, if I make no selection, then I stay with my local utility, which means I'm going to get the price to compare. So if I'm going to shop, then I compare everything back to that price, okay? And this is where we start getting into where some of these guys, how short-sighted they are. Because most of these call center reps, most of these call centers, they only can make a sale if they have the lower rate. The first question they ask when you're talking to a call center that does energy sales, the first thing that indicates if they're really not all that great, they'll want to know is the rate lower than the price to compare? And I'm going to show you in a little bit why that's not always a valid thing to be looking at. Because oftentimes the price to compare might be a little higher right now at that point in time, but that doesn't mean they have a better product. Or it might be the price to compare might be a little bit lower than what you're offering on that given day, but that doesn't mean that it's a better product. And we'll talk about why here in a little bit. We get into the rate war. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. When you look at a price on a bill, the price to compare, you might have something that, like, say this, let's just take this first example right here. So if we were talking to somebody in PPL today, the price to compare is 8.493, all right? Well, I might have something that's 8.6, all right? If you looked at it, just where it stands today, my rate is a little bit higher than what they've got. Now, that's not the case with this graph, with the example I'm about to give, but there's times where you're going to see it like this. If I look back at the previous 12 or 18 or 24-month history of PPL, I'm going to see what their rates have averaged, and they've actually averaged lower. Sometimes I'll look at this and they average higher, the historical aspect of the rate. And that's important because here's the thing. We just covered all these different factors that affect the price of electricity. There's a lot for those companies to manage to. Well, some of them do a better job than others. Some of them do a really good job of managing these changes in the market and these price fluctuations. Others do not. So just because that price to compare is lower now, the reality is what you need to do is dig in and see what the historical rates have been with that company, because they may have a low rate this month, but historically their rates have been really high. We've made a lot of sales on passes because we've done our homework and we've looked at these rates for competitive suppliers and local utilities. And you might say, you know what, Mr. Jones, I realize that you've got an 8.0 and I'm at an 8.2. However, if we look at the previous 18 months, the historical average on this pricing with your local utility, they've averaged an 8.7 and we've averaged an 8.1. So for the previous 18 months, we have had a better rate. That's why I'm suggesting that you go with us, because we've shown that historically we do a better job of keeping these rates low. You have to dig into this stuff a little deeper. Just selling based on the rate is really amateur stuff, and it's not the best value to the consumer. And if that's all you can do is close a deal when you have the better rate, you're going to have a hard time. Now, that being said, I will make this point. Although it's not the only thing, the rate is the most important thing. So you don't sit there and spend 20 minutes on the phone trying to convince somebody to buy if you have a slightly higher rate, all right? If your rate's a little bit higher, you're going to look for the angle. Maybe you've got a green product and they don't. Maybe your historical average is a little better and they don't. You're going to know what the main few angles that you take with your particular supplier. You're going to hit them a couple times, a couple quick objections, rebuttals, and if you can't close them, then bam, you get out of there and you move on to the next call. So it's not that you're going to sit there and hammer on somebody forever, but you have to know these details. You have to know these angles, because if you don't, you're going to miss those few times that you have a chance to convince somebody, even when your rate's not really the best. All right. Here's a different example. And this is an unusual one. You'll rarely see this, but here's the pricing for National Grid in Massachusetts, okay? And you can see with them, they have what they call a fixed price option, which is what others call, their variable rate. It's a 5-month deal or 6-month deal, and it stays at a certain rate. Here it is, 12.673. And then their variable product, it fluctuates every month. This is rare. Not very many utility companies have a fixed price option and a variable price option for their customers. Most of them, it's just, this is how we do our rates. So if you're with us, this is what you get. But this is a good reason why you do your homework and why you look at this stuff. Very few people do this in the business. They just put people on the phones and they dial, and either they got a better rate or they don't. Very short-sighted approach. You have to look at this stuff in detail. There's much more to it. All right, so we talked about that rate war. Now we're going to talk about how you win this thing. Like I said, you got to do your research. When you're on a new sales pass, you need to know the local utility's current price to compare. You need to know their 18-month average, okay, even their 24-month average. What have their rates looked like historically, okay? Not just what it is today, but what's it looked like historically. And it's important that you do that research, you do that homework, and you know that information. You need to know the plans, the rates, and fees of the competitive suppliers in that market. If we're in National Grid territory and I go to the National Grid website, it's going to show me not just can I see their rates, but it's also going to show me, it will have a spot on the site where you can select competitive suppliers. You go there and they'll have the rates for the main competitive suppliers in their area, and you can look at all their plans and their fees. So you can compare, You might have a 7.2 per kilowatt hour rate, and another competitive supplier might have a 7.2 per kilowatt hour rate, but they also have a $50 monthly fee, and you don't. So if there's a $50 monthly fee attached to it, they're not really paying just 7.2 cents per kilowatt hour. You see what I mean? They're paying that plus a $50 monthly fee. So you have to calculate those things into the comparison. This is why it's critically important to know this information. A lot of times the customers don't even know it because a lot of times they don't even know how to read their bill. Okay. So they're not aware of this stuff. And it's up to us to do our homework and be able to point it out to them. I cannot emphasize this enough, guys. You got to dig into this. You got to do this research. You should be doing this on every sales pass that you ever go on in energy. If you do the research like I'm telling you and you really drill down on this information, then you'll blow the competition away. You guys will do so well on these sales passes and you'll make a ton of money and you'll love it. If you don't, you'll be like everybody else and be talking about what's your rate, here's my rate, and it's either a win or a lose. That's not the way to do it. You also want to research their customer reviews. Okay, this is another big point. Let me tell you, energy is a dirty game. All right, and there's a number of companies out there that have been the subject of lawsuits because it's shown that they've done price gouging to their customers, that they have intentionally overcharged them or shown their usage to be different than it really is. There's all kinds of unscrupulous activities that occur. So you want to do that research because if somebody's got one of those companies, they might not know it. And if you've got a close rate, maybe a little bit higher, but it's close, and you've got a supplier that's got really good customer reviews, and they've got one of those guys that's been the subject of a lawsuit, well, right there is a good angle that you can use to make that sale. Okay, so all about information, and this thing goes way deeper than just a rate. All right, most of the time it is the rate, but if you do your homework on this kind of stuff, you'll be able to squeeze out an extra 1, 2, or 3 sales a day on situations where maybe you don't have the best rate, and that's going to end up making a big difference in your paycheck. Other things to look at, you want to know if they've advertised an upcoming rate increase. All right, so for these local utility companies, if they're going to increase their rates, they are required to put out a public notice. All right, so if somebody has said that their rates are going up, you can use that as a trigger to go ahead and get somebody to buy if maybe your rate right now looks a little bit higher because you know that they've got a rate increase coming up next month. All right. This is all about being informed and having the information at your disposal. Sample bill copies, you need to have those too. Whenever you're going into a sales pass, you want to get sample bill copies. You can find them online of your local utility and as well those main competitive suppliers. The reason why is that when you're crunching into this stuff, you got to show people how to read that bill. You need to know where the account number is. You need to know where their supply charge is. You need to know if they have a competitive supplier and they're charging monthly fees. You need to know where that's at on the bill so you can show the customer, because if you can't point it out to them and show them that it's really there, they have no way of knowing if you're telling the truth. So getting those sample bill copies is important. And then lastly, you need to write some material. And what I mean by that is on every sales pass you ever go on, the way a professional team looks at this stuff, you do this work. You research the local utility company. You research the competitive suppliers. You look at all this information and you comprise all this stuff, and then you go out and you write some maybe it's some couple of specific little pitches or parts of a pitch that you're going to illustrate for just that supplier, or some specific rebuttals that you're going to have in place based on their products. Okay, that's how you win this thing and you excel and you become a professional at this. All right, and you should do that. And that's not just with energy. If you're in the Telmar game, every single time you take on a new project, that's what you do. You dig into that stuff deep, and you look at what you have, you look at what the market has and your competition, and you come up with all the different angles. And every product or service you're ever going to sell is going to have different angles. And it's up to you to find those angles and exploit them. And that's how you do that. And if you'll put that kind of effort into it, you're going to win each and every time. It's a no-brainer. The main thing I want everybody to understand from this is, hopefully now you have an understanding of how electricity prices fluctuate in the market, why they fluctuate, and some of the things that you need to look at to really compare products. Because if all you're doing is looking at your rate compared to their rate, you're not really doing an apples to apples comparison. There's other things to look at besides just that rate. So hopefully this has been helpful to you. Thank you for playing, everybody. I appreciate your time. Looking forward to working with everybody. Have a great day.